And when I go through each piece, we try to pick a lot of pieces that were going to be accessible for kids in wheelchairs or just anyone really. And we also tried to vary ages and how many people could fit. We wanted to pick equipment that one kid couldn't dominate at a time, that multiple kids could use. So if you'll turn to the next one, I'll start going through the pieces. This is the big piece. It's called the primetime play structure. It's mainly for older kids, ages 5 to 7, and it lists all the different features around it. This just shows one side of it. It's got a lot of climbing structures, the things that older kids find fun. I will say now, each piece of equipment will come with a little sign that says the ages it's intended for use, and we will have a welcome and safety sign that basically says, adult supervision preferred, play at your own risk, that kind of thing. If you'll flip to the next one. This shows in the background the primetime play structure again for the big kids, and it shows the large sensory dome, and I'll show that more in a minute. But at the very front is the merry-go-all, and we picked this merry-go-round because, again, you can kind of see it's got structured seating, so kids with wheelchairs are able to get up in there and actually use the piece of equipment. It's used for all ages. One thing we really liked about it is unlike the old-time little merry-go-rounds where someone had to get off and actually push it from the outside, an adult can push it from the outside, or the kids can actually move that circular piece and spin it as well. So we liked that it had a lot of flexibility. If you'll go to the next one. This is a large sensory dome, and y'all, I'm going to be real. This is like my favorite piece on there. It's got a lot of climbing features. There are holes that you'll see in the big middle of the yellow. This is not the color we're using, by the way. This is just the mock-up color. Where the holes are where you can put sensory pods. And so those are different things like different games that kids can use while they're climbing. The bottom levels are where wheelchairs can pull right up to those sensory pods and still use them so they're accessible. And this is 5 to 12 as well. A lot of the sensory dome pieces that are on this, you'll actually see a version of them on the preschool's little playground too. So that way there's no fighting of like, oh, I can't do that, Mom. They have their own little version on it. So if you'll turn to the next one. So these are the ones that we've picked out for the sensory pods to go on there. Some of them make music. Some of them, it's like a little buzzer game that you can play. Some are like Connect Four, really, you use tic-tac-toe. Some make just chimes and you move them. Some are mazes. The great thing about these is they don't require batteries. They said used to you had to go out and change the battery every so often. This you use kinetic energy. So the kids literally spin this little knob to get it to go, and then it works on its own. So that's a super nice feature that no one has to go out there and maintain. So if you'll turn it to the next one. And then this is our arch swing. We kind of picked it, one, because swings take up a ton of space around the safety zone. And so we like this because not only could all the ages use it, but it's a big saucer swing that literally the brochures, depending on the kids' sizes, you could cram 3 to 5 kids on that thing at one time, or they can be used individually. So we really liked that one.
Adults can also fit on those.
Yeah,
I've heard. I
will say I might have swung on the one at the kindergarten. So, and I do have to give credit to Easton. I'm going to embarrass him just a little bit. I had him help vet all these pieces, so they have had a kid's stamp of approval. And then we really wanted some kind of musical instrument. And so on the back is the Merry Musical. And we really picked this one because it has 10 musical instruments in one instead of just one piece. And it has tonal and rhythmic side to it. My kids actually played on this exact piece of equipment this summer on vacation and loved it. I might have played on it too. But both the 4-year-old and the 11-year-old liked it. So that told me it was a pretty good piece to get. And again, you can see they're up just a smidge so that a wheelchair can easily come and pull under it and still have access to the drums or the other features. If you'll turn to the next one. This is the little kids, ta-da, big thing like the primetime structure. It's called the Echo Preschool. And I'm trying to show you the different angles on it. It has a lot of different features. It's got all the cool normal stuff like little slides and little crawl tunnels. I know my little one, the crawl tunnel is the really big deal. And but it's also got the little sensory games or sensory pods throughout the piece. There's even like a little seating area you can see on the bottom right that's got yellow seating there where 2 kids can sit, and there's actually like a little play structure that they can play with. I think it's a maze or a roller ball or something. So there's plenty of things to work physically as well as kind of cognitively, them get their energies out. If you'll turn to the next one. And this is just kind of the cost breakdown. I do want to point out a few things. One is that in the breakdown, they have fiber mulch. We are pretty sure Roger Shivers knows actually someone at Calvary who their company makes that. So we're pretty sure we can get it for a discount to maybe free. So that'll take off, I think it's about $3,000 or maybe a little more of that price. The same with freight. Roger actually knows someone who has a huge 32-foot bed trailer. And so the manufacturer for this company is actually in Fort Payne, Alabama. And so we realized it's cheaper for us to go and get it than for us to pay. I think it's $9,000 in freight. And so we can save a big chunk that way as well. And then I will be honest, they were really great Struthers when we kind of told them, hey, this is our budget. They were like things you can save on. And I was like, oh, we need a welcome safety sign. And they're like, do it local. So that's why you see it on the cost savings part. So there's a few things that aren't in that cost, which is we're talking about getting sales to completely shade cover that portion of the playground. And that's because it gets direct sunlight all day long because of where it is laid out on the grounds. And then fencing, of course, and the welcome and safety sign we'd actually have to get. When I talked to Roger, though, between what we're saving and what we still need to get, it's still going to be probably roughly about that 123, 125 mark for that phase. And then he's saying 50 or so for the awning, but I'm not holding him to that.
Yeah, don't hold him to that.
I'm not,
All right.
not at all.
Samantha, thank you. If we need some answers to questions in a little bit, I may have you kind of come back up. One thing just to kind of tack on to that, part of the goal of this part of phase one, and really a lot of what we've looked at is how can we, if we're going to go down this path, what you'll see in the renovation plan is what would help us do already the ministries we're doing, but also reach out and do the ministry and the outreach that we want to do. So there's a ton of young families, international families that live in that area that are already walking that neighborhood at night anyway. And so part of our hope was to be able to have a place that they're already there, that we can welcome them into, and that they can kind of feel is able to be their place, you know? And so that's kind of part of that, as well as just to kind of expand and create multiple venues for when we're doing church-wide stuff, like the awning that goes down the side of the fellowship hall, you know, where people can sit and where people can kind of hang out and have additional space as we go. So Samantha, thank you for that. I want to answer a few questions that have come in, and then we're going to kind of get some other questions, and I'm going to have members from the merger team kind of share to answer some of those questions. But one of them kind of goes right to this, and the question was, will the preschool area be altered, primarily the interior part of the section? So that's exactly what we're evaluating right now. One, what we really envision, and we've started the process of kind of gearing up for it, is that there are 3 classrooms that go down the hallway towards the existing nursery at Calvary. And so we started looking at how we can turn those into like a preschool wing and have a check-in station that kind of becomes like a portal that goes in, and where the 3, 4s, and 5s are right there, and they're not back in the nursery. But then we're also kind of examining and figuring out which walls are partition walls, which walls are structural walls, even back in the nursery, and letting Morgan and our nursery staff kind of take a look at, hey, is there some spaces that we'd like to maybe try to open up, create some larger space in the midst of that. So hopefully that kind of answers that question a little bit. Another question that came in is, what are the duties and responsibilities of the oversight and operations team? So that would be the leadership team and the finance team. Scott, do you want to kind of speak to that and kind of just answer that just a little bit, kind of coming from the polity subgroup? If you don't mind using the mic just because of the live stream, that would be helpful.
So it's really not any different than it is here. The leadership team is really just here to help the entire church make decisions, right? It's not just a handful of people. And, the finance team, their job is all the things financial, right? Making sure that we are financially structured well and that we manage our money the way we're supposed to. So.
To tag on to that leadership team, one of their primary responsibilities will be also personnel, like working with the elders and doing personnel type things. And so that would be kind of one of those main possibilities. Someone just asked, is the fiber mulch for the playground compatible with a wheelchair? So the short answer is, I'm not sure. The longer answer is, I'm pretty sure it is, because we helped put in the ADA accessible swing at Henderson Ward Stewart that Rotary put in a few years ago, and that used the same type of fiber mulch that we're looking at, because we brought in and probably wheelbarrowed like 30 yards of it when they installed that. And so short answer, I'm not sure, but long answer, I think so, as long as the layer is packed enough and it's deep enough. So Samantha, is that correct? Okay.
And so they recommended it, and really it's the most cost effective. The next level up is like the turf and stuff, and y'all, that's $25 a square foot. So this works, gives still accessibility, but it's still on the feasible side.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Couple other questions that came in, and then we'll see what questions you have. Someone said this. They said, how will we determine who gets a ballot? Now, I hope we were a little bit clear on that in the letter that you guys got, but just so you know, we're going to give every member and every regular attender a ballot. Now, the leadership team and the elders met even a couple months ago to talk about that, and really felt like, A, we needed to see the votes in both groups. But two, we really felt like just giving everybody a ballot, even if they've visited the first time today, like we had several visitors that came for the first time today, that was not exactly the most conducive to us really seeing what God was doing, because they have no idea what's going on, no idea where we've kind of been. So the decision from the elders and the leadership team was that we would ask active members, and we defined active members as those who had been physically present at least once in the last 12 months, all right, to vote, and then active regular attenders, which is someone who has been here at least twice a month over at least the last 3 months to vote in the midst of that. And we feel like that will give us a pretty good wide range of response and input. So hopefully that answers that question. Does anyone have any other questions about the voting process, kind of just on that you'd like to ask? All right, I'm going to mark that off. We did have one question that came in. Someone asked, why aren't we keeping either Calvary's name or our name? And look, from the very first conversation that Grant and I had, both of us kind of looked at one another and said, we're going to have to find a new identity. I mean, that was literally in the very first conversation. The very first conversations with our leadership, kind of went through that. And that's why we kind of went down that path. I was going to see Victoria. Would you maybe share just a little bit about the process that we went through with the naming and identity team?
I'm going to come up here by you.
And while you do that, Kurt, if you'll click on that top slide so that people can see, yeah, perfect, thank you. That way, if anybody wants to send any more questions.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if there was a slide with the logo on it or not, so I was going to point back to that. But so the naming and branding team subgroup of the merger group, we started meeting pretty early on in April with a company called ArtSpeak. This company does a lot of church branding, different branding for church ministries. And they do everything from helping you decide a name, helping you figure out different branding identities like core values and mission statements, different things like that, as well as more of the creative aspects. So the logo, the website, a lot of things of that sort, they help out with that as well. So when we first got started, we had a few just kind of exploratory Zoom calls where they really took some time and got to know both churches and to figure out what are commonalities between both, what are some areas that both churches are unique in.
They listened to sermons from both churches. We sent them writings that Grant had done, that I had done. We filled out, I think, both churches like a 16-page questionnaire about stories of people that we've reached, who we were. I mean, it was an amazingly thorough discovery process.
And so that was before our first initial call. And then we had an initial call where there was a few people from both Calvary and SEC, and we were able just to talk through based off a lot of the questions and stuff that they had already sent in. But I think the thing that stood out to me in that phase of the process was when they asked the question, what does your community need to know about Jesus? And it kind of just really kind of opened my eyes, like, this is what we're doing this for. Like, we're not renaming, we're not going through a merger because we want to. We're not doing it because we think it would be better, but we're doing it because it's what our community needs to understand Jesus better. So that question really kind of hit home for me. And we were able just to talk through that, talk about what it is our community needs, who it is we want our community to reach. And from there, they came back with a list of, I don't even know how many names. Some were really good, some were not so good.
So bad.
Some were actually really bad. I had like a roast name list on my phone, and every time I heard a bad one, I would add it to the list, and we would joke about it. But it was an interesting process, especially when we got that first list of names back, because we were like, what's going on? But they were really good with us and helped us work through those names, helped us understand why it is they chose some of those names. We then from there decided we really wanted some input from the church in general. So we created that feedback, sent it out to the church. People were able to submit their suggestions. We talked with both church staff and leadership about what the different naming options were, sent those in. And then as a merger team, we really just sat down one Thursday and we went through every single name. And we said, yay or nay. Is this what the identity that we feel like this church needs to be, or no? So that got us down to our last 3 names, all of which we spent. So this is to give you a time frame. This was from like April to July probably, of just narrowing it down to 3 names. So a lot of time, a lot of prayer, a lot of just kind of really thinking through who is it that Christ wants us to be for the city of Starkville? And who is it that he wants us to be as a new church? And so we finally narrowed it down and unanimously voted on Bridgeway Church. That was really exciting to me because my prayer throughout that process was that as a group, when we voted on that Thursday, that all of us would agree, that there wouldn't be a long 30-minute discussion of why it should be one name or the other, but that the Spirit would lead us all pretty unanimously to the same name. And I don't know who it was. I think it was Mr. Stephen was like, that's not going to happen. And I was like, you just wait. That's what I'm going to be praying for. And the next Thursday we came back, and there were 16 people there, and 14 people voted for Bridgeway. 2 people did not. But to me, that was a really good, like, it was a very clear, like, Bridgeway. Don't want to call anybody out or anything, but so that was really cool to just see how, even in something that could be very divisive, it was very clear, like, this is the name that the Lord wanted us to have. And I just kind of wanted to share one of the reasons I was very attracted to that name and why I do think that it is the name that was chosen. So to me, from the very beginning, when I saw Bridgeway, I really felt like it was a very clear example of what it is we're doing. Not only who we want to be to the community, but what we're doing within this merger. So we're coming together with 2 churches, becoming a bridge between 2 churches, bridging 2 churches, becoming one body. But in return, that's also who we want to be, not only right out of the gate, that's who we want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. We want to bring a bridge not only to our brothers and sisters in Christ at Calvary, But we also want to be a bridge to the city of Starkville. We want to be a bridge to the state of Mississippi, to the United States, and to the world. So to me, that was a very clear, when it clicked, and I was like, yeah, this is what it's going to be. We talked a lot about just to kind of spend a lot of time talking through whether communities should be in it, whether Baptists should be in it. But going back to what Joe was saying earlier, we really felt like that it was important that we created a new identity separate from either church. And so that was also a very unanimous decision, not only between the merger team, but both staff at both churches and leadership as well. So after we picked the name, we went through a logo process, and all of this is in the proposal. If you did not get one, there's a few stacked up back there. But this is the logo that we decided on. This too was a very, they pulled it up on our Zoom call, and we were all like, oh yeah, that's good. I literally texted Samantha Smizer, and I was like, my jaw just dropped. I was like, that was so good. I'm like sitting at work, supposed to be working, but on the Zoom call. But it's been a really great process so far. Process is not over yet. We're still going through some different branding conversations. Once we finalize, the logo and everything is finalized. So what you see in here, on this page too, just a little glimpse of what it'll look like. But then they'll also help with different assets that we can use for T-shirts, for Connect cards, for really anything that we'll use as a church to reach out to the community, stuff for campus and all that. But also just helping us to really hammer out and narrow down, which we already have, like core values, but just making sure all of that is cohesive and cohesive. I was just going to say another synonym for that, but yeah, I think that was it.
One of the other things that ArtSpeak has done is they've helped us kind of distill through that process and come up with even really just a messaging blueprint for how do we communicate kind of who we want to be and who we feel like God is leading us to be. And just look, the team did a fantastic job across the board. I actually was not in any of the bylaw meetings. The team that was writing the bylaws, Scott was part of that team, Julie was part of that team. They worked like hours and hours, and I was just reading what they were working on as they came back. I also was not part of the naming team, except for just the intro meetings where they wanted to talk with the pastors. And it was fun just to hear the reports. And even like the day that they got the logo, to start hearing everybody like texting back and forth, the excitement, and to see God kind of moving in the midst of that. It was a fun deal for me. All right, so that's all the questions except for one that I'm going to say for towards the end that have come in. So I kind of want to just open it up and let you guys, whoever would like to ask a question or share, you've got the mics here, here, and in the center. So go for it.
Hey, I'm Jackson, and I just had a question. What's the pastorship going to look like when the merger happens?
Yeah, so underneath the pastorship is that Pastor Grant and I will co-pastor alongside the body of elders. And so if you've been around our church at all, I have 3 other elders, Aaron Smizer, Denny Cole, and Scott Hunt, that meet with me, and we pray together. We ask kind of the bigger questions about where is God going, what does he want. We talk about how the church is doing, and they provide even just accountability, asking me kind of the hard questions and just making sure I'm staying healthy. And that's exactly what our elders at Bridgeway would do. It would be those 3 men from our church, 3 men from Calvary, and then Pastor Grant and I. So from a leadership and decision-making standpoint, it would look very much like it looks here, which is I'm making very few decisions as an individual here that aren't going to either our elders or our leadership team, and that would be the same if Grant and I would be making those decisions with those other teams. From a preaching standpoint, it would be us trading off every other week. You know, there may be seasons where I say to Grant, hey, I've got a message like today. As I was writing that message, I realized it was really 2 messages. And so where I may say, hey, I need these 2 weeks to really get this through. And then he may take the next 2 weeks. But it would really be, at least in this first year, what we've told the staffs is we think it needs to be as close to 50-50 as possible, because both churches need to get to know both of us in the pulpit, hear our hearts, and get to kind of know that. From a pastoral care standpoint, we're probably going to do a whole lot together over the first year. So whether it's funerals, in fact, we did a funeral for one of the deacons at Calvary for his mom together about a week ago. So whether it's funerals, hospital visits, counseling, I think we're probably going to make a very intentional choice to do a lot of that side by side, because I want y'all to be able to see Grant's heart and benefit from that, and he wants the people at Calvary to be able to have those same opportunities there. So even if one of y'all called me, it's like, hey, I need you to come and just pray with me, I'm probably going to instantly say, hey, that's great, I would love to. I'm going to bring Pastor Grant with me. And if one of his people said, hey, would you come, call Grant up and say, would you come visit? Grant's going to most likely say to them, hey, yes, but Joe and I are both going to come visit and sit down. So does that kind of help answer that? And then as we go through the process, there are going to be some areas that, look, just shift. If you've gotten to spend any time with Grant at all, like, Grant's a lover of people, all right, in a way that I'm not. And I love myself, and you know that if you've been around me, but like I'm not ever going to be the guy that just is like, man, this is so great. Like, let's just sit here and enjoy everybody being together. I'm going to be the guy that's like, let's get this done, and this done, and this done. But Grant is that guy. So even in our merger team meetings, you can ask the merger team, there were moments where like Grant was like, I just want us to enjoy what God's doing like right now in this moment, you know? And I'm like, all right, now that we've enjoyed it, let's do this. And so I think what you're going to see is there's going to be a real natural leaning into, I'm probably going to be doing a lot of the strategy side and direction because that's where my gifts are. And I'm going to be doing that with him. But Grant's also going to be the guy helping us kind of keep contact of our soul a little bit and making sure that like we don't get so caught up in getting the train to the station that nobody enjoys the process. Which, look, guys, I actually think that's going to be really healthy. Like, really healthy. And some of y'all know, some of y'all that have been with me for 5 years, like, there are those good parts of my personality, and then there are those parts that y'all just love me. And I appreciate that you love me in that. But I do think Grant and I provide a really good balance that is going to benefit. So does that answer that, Jackson, well enough? Do you have anything that you want kind of more clarity on?
No, that's pretty clear. That sounds really good.
Okay, I appreciate
like
that.
What we talked about this morning.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, all right, what else? Zach?
Okay, so I might have missed it, but with looking at the phases of like renovations and stuff in the proposal, I was curious about like dates and how that would affect us all joining together and having like worship services. Like, would we have to? Are we temporarily worshiping other places while work is being done, or how that?
So that was an original thought, is that we thought we were going to be looking at doing wholesale renovations immediately, and so needing to be somewhere else. A couple things developed as we've gone through the planning process. One is timeline for the construction companies that we've talked with really looks more like late spring, early summer, for them to be able to really get started, and for the architects to be able to kind of get all the drawings and plans together. In the midst of that, we also started evaluating other places in town, and just honestly, we had real issues finding a place that was big enough, that had ample parking, and that had space for children, for childcare to happen. And so when we saw kind of that, along with the idea that it was going to be late spring, early summer before we really needed to start tearing some things out in the sanctuary, we started saying, well, what if we kind of did our phases? And that way we could go ahead and come together in the facility there on North Jackson in November and start that process of integrating, and then get to the construction when we get there. So a couple things that'll probably happen first is that we have a plan and a design for a new stage layout that would actually expand the stage. It would take it from a multiple kind of staired approach going from the back to a two-tiered stage that would then use modular boxes, so that the weeks that we have choir, we could take those boxes out, and we would have like the choir kind of steps that you see there. But the weeks that we don't, we could put those boxes in, and it would flatten the stage into two primary levels, one being a very large kind of front open level, one being a back level that's about 10 feet wide, I think, if I'm remembering the measurements right. That we can build in ourselves. And so probably one of the first things we would do is in November and December is we would start building that out. We would get groups of men to come up and start framing, go in sections. So we probably would do the back section first, building out the modular stuff through the front part of the bottom lip so that we could run conduit. for stage boxes eventually, and then start framing in the wings and middle and side so that we could do that. That we can do, we think, November, December, early January. We've also talked with the audio company, and so Kurt, if you'll put that up, we really feel like we need to go ahead and address the audio system, because guys, it's just bad. Like, and I don't even have a better word than just bad. And if you've been in the choir or on the praise team, like, it's just bad. And so, and they know that, like, that's not a shock, like, and they told us that, like, from the very first time. They were like, hey, our sound system is bad. And so we were like, all right. So we think we can go ahead, and we should go ahead and address that. We want to be able to make sure that clarity can happen, whether it's in the music or whether it's in the speaking. We want to be sure that we can go ahead and be able to do the type of worship that we really want to do together. So if you'll go ahead and move down, this is what that audio hall looks like. It's about $100,000 from the main speaker system to the wiring on the stage and the floor boxes to monitoring for the choir and for the musicians on stage, kind of just all of that. I mean, it would be a full audio system overhaul from left to right, kind of in the midst of that. And we think that if we do that, the lead time on that could happen, depending on the stage build out, by January in the midst of that, you know, just depending on the details. But Zach, to go a little deeper, and then Russell, I'll let you kind of peg off of that. This has been a really weird balance, guys, of trying to plan and work out the details as best we can without putting the cart before the horse. Does that make sense? So even with the contractors and the companies we've talked with, we've really tried to, in every facet of this, say, okay, this is the best picture of what we think it could look like, and yet not remove every decision from the new church if we go down this path. Does that make sense? So one of the things that we decided we wanted to do, even with the renovations, is that before we start spending any money, is the church is not approving us to spend all of this money when we vote on the merger. We will come back with every phase and present that to the United Church and let the church approve every phase of this. Does that make sense? Because to us, that just felt right. Same thing with the leadership. There's some leadership that we know we need, elders and finance team, to make sure we've got pretty instant accountability. But we really wanted there to be a process where the United Church got to be a part of that and set that, and so that we weren't coming and saying, look, you're just going to take one vote and vote on literally every single part of what this thing is going to look like over the next 14 months that's really going to set up the next few years. So I don't know if that makes sense or not. I don't know if we even got close to that ballpark. Probably the merger team would tell you that we feel good in some places, unsure in others, but that was our goal. Russell, did you want to kind of tag on to that? Yeah, so we would bring over the audio system overhaul. We would integrate our current systems for live streaming into what we do. Actually, from day one, we'll bring our equipment and our live streaming stuff over so that we kind of are able to immediately go into what we've been doing live stream-wise from the new church. But then all of that would integrate into that. The rest, the video and lighting systems, we would hold off into phase 2 because it makes the most sense to do those systems when we're in the process of doing renovations inside the sanctuary. As we're stripping out molding off of the walls and we're flattening things out and we're putting some different textures up, that's really where it makes the most sense to go ahead and also address the video and the lighting elements in the room. Does that make sense? Does that answer that question, Russell? Okay. All right. Those are good. Those are both really good questions. What else? I'm seeing someone texted in and said, can you tell us a little bit about how this process has challenged and brought transformation in you? That's an unfair question, but it's a really good question. Look, guys, I would tell you from day one, I think the first prayer that I had to pray in this that pushed me was, God, am I willing to let go of the church that you called me here to lead and the church that we've poured 5 years into? And so Grant and I had this first long conversation where we talked theology and philosophy of ministry and who our churches were, and like, look, are we just stone cold crazy? Like, should we even talk about this or not? But then the second conversation, we really sat down, and the conversation was, who's going to be the pastor? Who's going to be the lead church? And in that who's going to be the pastor conversation, both of us, I think, had really kind of walked for that last 2 weeks that same path of praying like, God, do I have to be the pastor? Or am I willing to say, if you want this to happen, that I'll be willing to let it go? And I'll tell you, when Grant and I sat down, it was after a meeting. We had met with about 8 to 9 other pastors. It was at First Baptist. And just prayed together, talked about some things in the community together. And we stayed back to kind of talk because we hadn't talked since the first conversation. And we just started talking about that. And it was very obvious that both of us, I think, had ended up in that same position where we were willing to let it go. And guys, I'll tell you, so the first thing was that made it very easy for us to then talk about what would it look like to lead together. Because I'm telling you, that's a weird conversation, right? Like, to co-pastor. I mean, that's why, like, we spent most of the spring with y'all looking at me and being like, all right, Joe, but, like, who would really be in charge, you know? But I think that was the first way that this thing really challenged me. I think the second way really was in the idea of listening. And could I slow myself down, and could I walk through this and lead through this in a way that would listen to what you were saying to me, whether it was with our elders in my office and just the 4 of us, whether it was in our town halls, whether it was one-on-one with you, and could I let God help me hear what you were saying to me in a way that it didn't feel like a personal attack. It didn't feel like something that I immediately had to answer, but I could let God speak and figure out what maybe God was trying to say to me through you guys as a church. And look, that was hard in some moments. It was hard to not get my feelings hurt because you guys asked some really hard questions, especially in the spring. But they were good questions, and they were legitimate questions. You guys asked about even some processes about where we were and slowing down, and processes about, look, can we do this in a way that does bring everybody along, that pushed on me and made me really spend some time, I think, praying about what does unity look like. Walking through experiencing God this summer, was good. It was good for me to walk through, to be reminded what it looks like to say, look, if God is in something, I don't have to sell it. And I think that's the other area, because look, guys, I'm a vision guy, right? Like, I want to get excited. I want to get jacked up about what God's doing, and I want to get you excited about it. I want you to be excited about what God's doing. But I think that was the other area that God really pushed me on, was the idea that, look, if he was in this, I didn't need to sell it. And I could trust the Holy Spirit to speak to you just like I was trusting it to speak to me. So I don't know, whoever asked that, that's a really good question. That's a hard question, but I hope maybe that answers it a little bit, because those are some of the ways I think God definitely pushed on me. So that's good. All right, who else has a question? Yeah, Will.
So I'm Will. Real quick question. How's this going to affect our established partnerships with other churches that we do mission trips with the community, with being a new church? Or is it going to be, we're going to take on both churches' partnerships? Or are we going to be
so for right now, for the first full year, we have said, look, we're going to honor all of our current partnerships. So Calvary has a couple missionaries in China and in Thailand that they support. We're supporting those missionaries, and we're actually upping that support from what they were already doing. We support 3 different church plants, 2 here in Mississippi, and then we support, it's not a church plant, but a smaller church in Long Island that we've gone to. So we'll continue that support. Same thing with our cooperative program support. We have in there, I think if I'm looking at the budget right, Calvary was supporting the BSU. That is still there. They were supporting the Baptist Children's Village. We were supporting the Crisis and Pregnancy Center, and they were supporting that. We bumped that up as well just because we feel like that's an area we want to lean into more. In the midst of that, we were already doing seminary scholarships. And so, I mean, all of those commitments, we've said, look, for at least the first year, we want to honor every single one of them. Our hope is to really grow them. And just like we've kind of been able to see those grow. And so in the first year, we've got 11.4% of the budget right now going to those missional outside causes. Our hope, just so that y'all will know, is the merger team is handing the new finance team a kind of a launching point for them to consider the idea, and we got this from Experiencing God, the idea of doing a faith budget. And so if God blesses this, if we go down this path and we just start seeing him provide in ways that we couldn't imagine, what are the other areas that we really could dream about seeing God use us in? Whether it's in foster care and adoption ministry, whether it's in refugee ministry, whether it's in additional church planning, and helping bring other churches on board with that. And so our hope is that somewhere between now and next summer, that the new finance team, I'm really praying will come to the church and say, hey, God has brought in more than we imagined. And so here's some of the dreams that we've had, and that we've talked to the staff and we've talked to the ministries about what we think we could do because of that. So does that answer that, Will?
Yes, sir.
Okay, excellent. That's a good question. All right. Any others?
So one thing the biggest reason I'm positive about the merger is just, I think the world around us, Starkville specifically, it's just rare to see churches come together and merge. And it's really, the verses that have been in my mind are like, kind of like the passages are like, you know, when Jesus told the disciples that the way that the world's going to know that we're his disciples is by the love we have for one another. And then also when Jesus prayed for everyone, future believers, so including us, that just the way that they're going to know that God sent him was by our unity. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but that's the reason I've been the most positive. But on the other side of that, what conversations have y'all had about just like, because one thing I would hate is for a church to merge and then split, which I think that's going to happen, but what conversations have y'all had about that? Because that would have the opposite effect of, you know, of showing the world that churches can do this, Christians can actually be unified.
Yeah.
So that's my question.
So Grant and I have talked, our staffs have talked, the merger team spent a lot of time talking, and we didn't really talk about what happens if the new church splits as much as we spent time talking about what does unity really look like. And I mean, and we talked about it from votes to even just like functionality, like working together, you know, and what does the process look like of two churches becoming one, kind of in the midst of that. And part of what I think dominated a lot of those conversations was the idea that we really wanted to see and try to do this in a way that could give everybody the best chance of making the journey with us. In fact, Stephen, I feel like you really carried a really good voice in the midst of that. Do you want to share anything or speak to that at all, just kind of some of those conversations we had?
Okay, so the two verses that you shared, those were on my heart too, and I think that's you know, the heart of one of the reasons we slowed everything down. You know, when early on we talked to Joe and Grant about just slowing the process down to give people a chance to digest and come along and get the vision. Because the minute we started meeting, one of the first things that we found out, obviously we had that awkward moment, but we saw the unity. I mean, could two walk together except to be agreed? We had a like mind. We had a like mind when we went through all of our doctrinal presentations. We looked at everything from elders, deacons, church, all of these things. We went through all these verses. And amongst the leadership team, we had the team that was together, we had a like mind. And so that allowed us to see that, okay? And we wanted the body to see that, because if they saw what we were doing and what the vision was and what God was doing here, then we felt like that they would come along. But that had to have time. And then of course, and it, you know, Jesus cares about the lost, and he cares about his body, his people. And if he cares about them, then obviously we should. And so I think slowing it down allowed us to to really think through that, really bond as a group. And then also, the thing I was impressed with Calvary, because I don't know that we had that problem here. I think there's a lot better. Joe's a really good communicator here. You guys have asked really good questions, and I think but I felt like that Calvary maybe had more of a need to understand what was happening. And so a lot of the team members would go to the Sunday school classes over there, and they would sit with those people, and they would say, look, what's your concerns? What's your questions? And then those people would bring legit questions, and then they would come to us, and we'd talk about them, and then we would try to answer them, because everybody has legit questions. And I think that process hopefully has allowed people to see what God's doing, to get the vision for what the new church, the better together idea, and it's straight up true. This body needs some maturity, and Calvary has some maturity, and that body needs some life and passion. And the younger life and passion and the uniqueness of this group and the way we're not churchy, okay? We're not churchy. This is not it's in a factory. Come on, dude. There's not a lot of churchy stuff going on in here. Joe's not churchy. And so, and they're not churchy either, okay? But I think together, given some time, working through these conversations with a real care that nobody gets left behind. The worst thing I would hate is that people would just bail on the new church. And so, I mean, even the things I've talked about, Joe, and we've talked about, I would love to see after the follow-up, if anybody has dissensions or concerns, that we go and aggressively evangelize, reach out to them and let them know, because God cares. We want everybody to be a part, because this is just, by the way, in my mind, this is just really just a bump and a long-term goal of what God's trying to do through a group of people in this community. And I think it's a bump that God's trying to do outside of our church. I really would love to see our church bridge with other churches the way the vision is. You guys had a conversation. You were bridging before we were bridging, because you were trying to do something between two churches. I would like to see that progression, because I think that if we have that vision as a church to reach out and connect with other churches and let them be their own entities, and still we will have a huger impact on the lost, greater than just this little entity. So I think that's God's heart. I don't know if I answered the question. I feel like the slowing it down, and I think Calvary did a great job, like I said, going to the Sunday school, keep the older people, the younger people, just really communicating and trying to get everybody's questions answered. Everybody has a genuine concern. We want them to have their answers, and we want them to understand the vision that God has prepared, God is putting in the hearts of the leadership, and have that disseminate down so they can get on board and get into the business of doing the things God has us do together. So.
Thanks, Stephen.
I don't know if that answered that.
Yeah, David, does that kind of get close? That's good. Somebody sent in a question. I'm actually going to ask Tyler to answer it. So the question is, would anything change in youth ministry? So Tyler, you want to kind of maybe answer that and speak to that?
Yeah, so I even had a talk with my students about this Wednesday night, just kind of addressing the, not really awkwardness, but the obvious differences there is in going from about 12 to 15 youth to a room packed with 30 students. It's kind of, we're all in new territory, but I would say that as far as like the goals or like the foundations of our youth ministry here, like nothing really changes. I mean, those things are biblical, and so I would say functionally, like we're gonna have to make some changes. Like an obvious one that I talked to the students about, I like on Wednesday nights when we do our small group Bible study, I used to like that we could circle up and just it be more conversational. We can't make a 30-person circle in a room. So, I mean, we kind of have to sit kind of like this style seating, but I try to stress to the kids that like I'm not preaching at them on Wednesday night. Like we're still doing a Bible study. I want them to feel like they can ask questions, and I feel like that's how we grow. And I mean, they're getting preached to on Sunday mornings, hopefully being plugged in that way. So I would say no. Our goal is still to try to help students be fruitful followers of Christ in their home lives, at school, and just in their everyday, ordinary activities. And so we'll have to change some of the functionality stuff, and the numbers will be a little bigger. And also, I would say another change, we're going to have to start developing more leaders to help me, for sure. But I would say just like foundation-wise, not much is going to change.
Okay. Thank you, Tyler. We had another question that came in that said, what happens if one church crosses 75% and one church doesn't? And so look, this is another one of those questions where I don't have a real good just patent answer. We've talked about this. And what we've tried to say is a lot of that depends on what the votes actually are. Because there's not a lot of difference between 74% and 76%, right? Functionally. And so we've really talked about what happens if both churches get just over 75%. And I would tell you, I think leadership in both churches doesn't feel like that's a real good picture of spiritual unity. Does it mean we could go on and just go ahead and charge down the path? Yes. Does it mean that we will? I don't think so. What we've talked about is that, we're really praying that God provides an overwhelming sense of, is this right or is it not? If we're right at that line of 75%, that probably what we're doing is we're calling a family meeting. And we're saying, hey, and we're asking questions like, is there something that we could have answered or addressed that would have made a difference for you? Those of you that voted no, is there something that we could have done that would have made a difference? Does that make sense? And trying to figure out, it wasn't right there. Now, look, if we're at 60%, I think we've got a pretty obvious answer the other way. And if we're at 85, 90%, I think we've got a pretty obvious answer that way, but we've really talked about what if it's not definitive in that. But we've also talked about what if one church is definitive and the other church is not. And I think Grant and I would tell you both the same thing, that in that space, we want to give the other church some space to talk about that. So if it's us, I say, Grant, I hope you would give me some time. I said, because we're going to need some time to just pray. We're going to need some time to talk together and to figure out where do we go next. And so and he would say the same thing, that if that's them, they would need some time to pray or to figure out where we go next. And look, I would tell you guys that functionally, if we came in and our vote was 60% and it was very obvious this was not where God was going, we would need some time. We would need some time to sit down together and say, okay, we have two completely different pictures of where God is going. So how do we reconcile that? What do we need to talk about? What do we need to pray about, in the midst, so that we can get back on the same page for wherever God wants to take us? We are not going to keep trying to revote and relitigate until we get a yes vote, all right? And someone asked that, and I think that's a pretty fair question. We are not going to do that. But we also want to say, this is not a midterm election either. You know what I mean? Where we're just trying to get a result or cross a line. We're seeking unity. We're seeking what God really wants for us as a church. And so we're trying to kind of walk with that. So I don't know if that gets close to answering that, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a picture of some of the conversations that we've had in the midst of that. Jakarian, can you come to the mic, Jay? Just thank you, man. Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Testing. All right, just to add to that, I think it's really, really, really important for those of us who may be leaning towards no to be open to have a conversation. Because we don't want people to just hit the no and leave, because that leaves us in a weird place on, do we move forward, do we not? We're trying to reach out to people, they're not responding. But we want to be a better church at the same time, and we don't want to leave people behind. So just, if you have conversations with people who you feel maybe, on that no side, just tell them, feel free to express, how you feel. That's going to make us better.
Yeah, that's right.
We need that.
And look, just honestly, a lot of us in our church have some baggage from other churches. Right? So let's just kind of be honest. Here's the deal, guys. We're not going to kick you out of the church if you vote no. Like, we're not going to nail you up on a cross. We're not going to rake you over coals. We're not going to scream at you or yell at you or tell you that somehow you don't love Jesus or that you don't love us. Like, I mean, that's what Jay is saying is right. Like, we want you to vote and to cast that ballot how you feel the Spirit of God is leading you to do that. And part of that is, if you know it's a no, is we need to know why. Because we need to be able to balance in and prayerfully discern like where those responses are. Does that make sense? That's a really good point, Jakari. I'm glad you added that, man. We had another question that came in that just said, are there long-range plans to make any part of the building in North Jackson more like handicap accessible? And so I would tell you that we do have some plans that we want to do that. We want to start with some of the restrooms in the worship center and sanctuary to make them more accessible for wheelchairs, for those that may be handicapped. And then we got to just kind of start going through the building. And so some of that is we got to figure out like how much can we do at any one time that doesn't all of a sudden trip some type of crazy code thing. That means we got to look at all of a sudden like $500,000, you know, of just code upgrades in other areas. But we are talking about that, and we are talking about where we can start that process and kind of walk it through in the midst of that. But that's also a good question. All right. Someone asked and said, are there any plans to continue our monthly potlucks? We don't know yet. This is another like function of cart before the horse and not entirely sure. Could we do monthly potlucks on a Sunday morning? We could, and we think we can do, and we'll probably try a couple like around special events in the first 6 months, but we're just going to be putting people everywhere. And that's okay. Like, we did that at our church in Georgia. We would do like a couple of like meals on the grounds, you know. And so we had a worship attendance of about 500 to 600, and our fellowship hall sat maybe 300. And so we would put a big ginormous tent outside, and we would have people. We would pack the fellowship hall. We would pack the tent. We would have people sitting in any classroom that was close to the fellowship hall. And look, did you get to see everybody in one room? No. Was it crazy fun? Yeah. Like, everybody had a good time, you know, and so we'll probably try that. We'll probably try a couple night type like potlucks like we've done here, where we know it's going to be a little bit of a smaller crowd because it's night and not everybody will come back, and where maybe we can kind of fit most everybody in to one space. But one of those big things is one of the first projects in phase one is going to be getting the storage building built on the backside, so we can empty out the storage closets, knock down that partition wall, and expand that fellowship hall out. It's part of the reason why in phase one that awning is part of that playground area, because we think we can add another 75 people once we knock that wall out. We think we can sit another 75 underneath that awning running down the side of the fellowship hall, you know, with fans and covered seating. And so we think we can increase pretty quick that capacity in the first several months by about 150. So, but in the midst of that, that's also one of those ministry things that we didn't want to try to dictate until we knew if we were going to do this, and that we wanted to let the staffs and the ministry heads talk about like how they wanted to do it, how they wanted to try it, and then go from there. But that's a good question, and hopefully that kind of answers that. But I would tell you, all the leadership at Calvary, they're very positive about potlucks, man. Like, they mention it every single time that we meet. One of their new elders is like, his potluck is on his mind.
To the point where he suggested the name Potluck Community Church.
Yes, yeah. We put it right up there with Unity Community when he suggested it. So we do, for good or worse, you know. Somebody asked and said, is there anything planned to fix parking at the new building? And so, yes, a couple things that we're planning to do is, one, we're going to tear out the fencing that's in that back grassy area so that we can access it and really park people there. Two, we're looking at the lot that is on the north side of the facility and going to try to see if we can get the city to give us like a temporary permission to maybe just go in and with crushed limestone put in like a gravel parking area. They gave Pine Lake that permission, so we're going to try to use that to our benefit, you know. We're also planning on cutting an outlet. The side parking lot on the south side of the property goes all the way down to the property line, which ends at the street that comes back around Park Avenue. And so what we want to do is just go in and cut an outlet in that parking lot, which will literally come right out onto the street. So we've got an outlet on the back side of that parking lot, which we think will help with traffic flow just on Sunday mornings as well. However, there's a neighborhood back there, but the property, Calvary owns a property that wraps right around to that street. So it would literally be just cutting and making the driveway extend to meet up with the road right there. So hopefully that kind of answers that. And then look, guys, if God blesses this thing, and if we do this right, and I'll tell you, we're having a lot of conversations about how do we do this well? How do we help people connect well? And look, we're having to talk about that as a church. We've averaged 260 or more people every Sunday for the last 6 weeks. So just simmer on that for a minute. On Sunday mornings here, we've averaged 260 or more over the last 6 weeks. So last Sunday, when we were together at Calvary, we had 380 people there. We were 65% of that group. And it still doesn't feel like that because we're still split up into multiple services. But that's the reality. So if we've got to do connection well, whether we merge or not. We've got to do discipleship well. We've got to do community outreach and evangelism well. And I would tell you that if we do those things well, I really think that probably sooner than later, we're going to have like even longer range conversations about can we expand this facility and stay here, or do we need to go and start thinking about where else do we need to be? But in the midst of that, I'm going to be pushing. Because look, I don't want to talk about a second service. I don't want to talk about expanding facility until we've sent out at least one revitalization and planning team. And Grant knows that. The elder guys that I've talked to know that. So part of what I'm trying to put together is what does a long-range plan look like that very intentionally plans on us sending out groups of 30 or 40 or 50 people to go help start other churches and to be a part of that. And that if we do that, can we almost balance our growth with our sending along that path, if that makes sense. But look, if God, even if we're sending people out and the Lord just blesses and we start seeing revival happen, I would just tell you all bets are off, man. We'll just figure it out and smoke cigarettes and give each other hugs along the way for the stress, because at that point I'll be having a heart attack, man. I won't really be smoking cigarettes, all right? I just realized we're live streaming this, and that was not a good joke. So if you're watching this, I don't smoke cigarettes, all right? I know Jackson's like, that's not. Sarah's going to get on to me about that. Okay. What other questions do you guys have? I'm really not churchy at all, Stephen. You're right. Any other questions? Bo?
So I don't have a question, but I do have an exhortation. I want to encourage you, if you are still on the leaning more toward the no than the yes, and you haven't had a conversation, like a heart-to-heart sit-down conversation with both pastors, not just Joe, who we're very comfortable with, but with Grant as well, especially if Grant is maybe one of the reasons that you're leaning towards a no, sit down and have a conversation with Grant, because I'm almost certain that you will be very surprised when you do. Lindy and I were very hard-nosed through the first half of this process. And you don't really force my wife to do anything, but I came as close to forcing her as you possibly could to sit down and have a conversation with Grant, and we were just completely blown away. I mean, at his heart, at how similar he truly is to Joe, and what his heart is for this community and for the gospel and for just the church in general. So I just want to encourage you to sit down and have that conversation, especially with Grant, but with both pastors, if you are still hesitant in any way about the merger.
Bo, I appreciate that. Look, I want to share with you something that Morgan Ailes, who's our preschool coordinator, sent in, because I think this is also great. She just said, look, she said, I have a prayer request for people who may be struggling with being at a new location physically. It's a totally different vibe, and she says, and some people may be struggling to adjust to a new setting. And she said, I just think we need to pray that there is support and that we walk with each other through that we realize that that's a legitimate, natural thing, right? But that we'll all step up and step in to make sure that if this is the new place that we're going to, that it becomes our home just as much as this has been our home. And look, I said that to you guys back in the spring, that I really believed in my heart that if we lean into this process, that the concerns that we have about culture and feel and vibe and all of that really will take care of themselves. And I would tell you, I still 100% believe that in my heart, that if you show up and you show up with all of yourselves, that who Calvary is syncs with that so much that I think, A, you're not going to be concerned about that. And I think, B, even what Bo said about with Grant, I would tell you with all of their leadership that I've had the time to be able to spend with, I really have just been honestly more and more surprised along that path, that there really is such a similar heartbeat that beats in that. But I think that's a really good just request from Morgan and just exhortation that we need to be praying about that, because look, it is different. I want to share with you one other question, and then if you have any others that came in, and someone just said this. They said, I'm worried about getting lost in a larger congregation. And they said, will there be opportunities for me to be as involved in the new church like I was involved at SEC before? And look, that's a really good question, right? Because I think for us, we are even now a much larger congregation than we have been. And I think we feel a little bit of this struggle of we're struggling with how do we really healthily still connect people? And guys, look, we're trying to figure it out. How do we do it in small groups? How do we do it on Sunday mornings? How do we do it in a way that helps keep that heartbeat and that DNA that has been part of what we love in our church? But we're going to have to be just as intentional about it post-merger. We're going to have to know that on Sunday mornings, part of what I've been saying to you about those 2 minutes, that's for real. No one should be able to walk into this building or that building and walk back out without somebody talking to them. And it happens. I could show you visitors who have come in the last 6 months at our church, and I've been the only one that's talked to them. And look, that's not to throw stones at anybody. That's because we've gotten to the size point that if we're not careful, it will be easy to look for the people that we know. Post-merger, how much easier will it be to look for the people that you know? You're in a strange room, right, that you're not used to, in a building that we're getting used to, and it's going to be a huge temptation. We're going to have to be intentional about saying, you know what, I'm just going to talk to somebody I don't know. Whether I'm an extrovert or an introvert, it doesn't matter. As a brother and sister in Christ, I'm going to talk to somebody I don't know. And I'm going to get to know who they are. In small groups, we're going to have to be willing to say that, you know what, we're going to invest, whether it's on a Sunday morning, whether it's on a Wednesday night, whether it's part of a service team, and know that those groups are going to be where we really begin to build a sense of community together. I would tell you that the staffs are already meeting together and talking about how do we try to do what we do in the best way possible to allow you guys as church members to be able to plug in and to be involved and to connect to one another and to the community. And so I would say I think that's a really good question. And I would tell you the staff and the leadership is going to do everything we can, but we're going to need you to be there with us. And we're going to need you to step up and to do those same things. One dinner group from the summer, I heard back, met together yesterday and watched the Mississippi State game together. I love that. Like, I love that because I didn't ask them to do that. Like, they just reached back out to the people from both Calvary and SEC that were part of their dinner group and said, hey, why don't y'all come over and let's watch the game together. I would love to see other groups do that. But if I have to be the one, or if Tyler or Truman or Ari or Moose, if we have to be the ones that continually prod you guys, it's really not that real, is it? It's just us prodding you. And so there's some of that I'm really praying that God will just spark in y'all and that God will spark in the people of Calvary. I'm going to share with you one thing that I really think they do well, and this is something that I think we need. Because look, they show up for one another well. And if I'm just being honest with you guys, they show up for one another in a way that we don't always do. So the funeral that I did for Kevin Birchfield's mom, Kevin's mom was not from here. She was from the Delta and from Greenwood. She had been down in a nursing home in Louisville. So, I mean, not part of Calvary at all. But I went to that funeral, and man, there were like 20 people from Kevin's small group, and from Calvary that just were there to support him because they knew that his mom wasn't going to have any other family or friends really there, and they just wanted to be there for him. That's an area that's been, I think, a place that they really, guys, do that well. And I think they will be able to teach us that. For those of us that struggle with it, I think they will encourage those of us that sometimes we do it well, sometimes we do it semi-well. I think they will be an encouragement to that. And I think we need that. Because look, we can have 260, 275 people here right now, and that's fine. But unless we're connecting with them and discipling them, it really means nothing. Jesus is not going to look at any of us and be like, hey, how many people did you have in average worship attendance on a Sunday morning? That's not going to be any part of what comes out of his mouth. He's going to say, hey, did you love the people that came in your door? Did you disciple them and help them love me better? On.
One suggestion is this does pass, that we have construct a photo roster, or there's a term for that, of members of both churches, and as the new church comes together, so that visually we can get an idea of who's who and start putting names with faces, since there's going to be two groups of people that aren't that familiar with one another, to try to, accelerate that process.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Russell. We do name tags just across the board. All right. Any other questions? Any other comments that you guys want to share? Jennifer?
I don't really have a question, but I do have some comments that I want to make. And they're going to be similar to what other people have said up to this point. This has not been an easy year for me spiritually. I mean, Joe hit us at the very beginning of the year with this idea of a merger, and I was an immediate no. He knows this. And I've wavered back and forth all year about what I think about this merger. This church has been my home for the last 14, 15 years. It's where I was baptized as an adult. It's where I've raised my kids. I love the come as you are culture that we have here. I mean, it's very welcoming. You don't feel like you're going to church. My kids have run laps around this sanctuary for years. I don't like, we're just not a formal place, and people always feel welcome and comfortable here. So if I focus on what I want in a church, I don't want to leave. I want to stay here. This is where, like I said, this is my home. I don't want to change, but as Joe said, we've already changed. I mean, when he came, we had like 45, 50 people here on a good Sunday. And so now we're in the 200 range. It's like, I don't know, hardly anybody that's coming, if I'm really honest. So it has grown, it has changed. And then over the summer with the Experiencing God study, I mean, it was a wonderful time. Those of you who weren't a part of it, you missed out. Because it was really great getting to know a lot of the other people from Calvary. Every week I tried to make sure I was sitting at a different table, and I got to talk with so many different people. And they really do have the same heart that we have. Talking with them, it was, an instant bond with all of them. And part of the study, the principle 5 in the study is that God's invitation for you to work with him always leads you to a crisis of belief that requires faith and action. And I've had, crises of belief, throughout this year. Just this last week, and you can ask my family, I've been in not a good place as this vote gets closer and closer. So I've really been experiencing that crisis of belief. My doubts, my own personal desires have crept in. I don't want to. I don't. I keep hearing it in my head. And earlier this year, as I'm reading through the Bible, hit Numbers 14:9, where Moses had sent out the spies to spy out the land. They come back at the report. Most of them say, no, we can't do this, we can't do this. And Joshua's like, what do you mean we can't do this? He says, don't rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the people of the land. So that verse has been kind of in my mind throughout this year. It's like, don't be afraid, and don't rebel against the Lord. Because we all have a rebellious nature. I have a really rebellious nature. And me just saying, no, I don't want to change. Can't make me kind of thing. I mean, that's rebelling against the Lord. And also Proverbs 16:3, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. So really have to rely on him. So if we really want to experience God, if we really want to see revival in our church, in our community, we have to be obedient and trust him. So these are the things I'm telling myself this weekend. All signs seem to be pointing to a yes in this merger. I mean, just the way that the proposal process has gone through, getting an offer on this building, if we do that, just like there have not been any really big red flags along this whole way, and there is a unity of spirit. But, am I afraid? Yeah, I am. Do I have doubts? Yeah. Is it going to be hard this next year and a half as we really come together? Yes, it is going to be. But do I trust that God is for me and not against me? Yes, I do. So I really have to, put my faith in him, lean on him, if, I'm going to really see what he wants to do with us as a church in our community. So just my thoughts.
I appreciate that, Jennifer. That's good. Thank you. All right. Anybody else? Jackson. Yeah.
Yeah, I got one more. You talked about like our role as the people of the church, what we're supposed to be doing, like being there for other believers in the church and getting to meet other people. Are there any other roles we should be aware of, trying to be intentional about?
So look, I would tell you, I think yeah, he was just asking, like, are there any other roles? Is there anything else that I think as church members that we need y'all to be ready to step in and do and play? And I think that's a good question. I would tell you, I think yes. I'm unsure what they are right now. That's one of those things that I think once we get through a vote and we know, like, is this where we're going or is it not where we're going, that picture will begin to get a whole lot more clear. I think, are we going to need a ton more help in student ministry? Yeah. We're going to need adults and college students and young adults to invest in middle school and high school students. Are we going to need mentors to walk and disciple college students? Yeah, we're going to need dozens of mentors to walk and disciple college students. Are we going to need people that can step up and lead small groups and be willing to help rally a group together? Yeah, we're going to need people who maybe either haven't taught in a while or maybe you've never taught to be willing to facilitate and to lead a group. Are we going to need people to run live streams and sound and welcome and help park? We're going to need all those things, Jackson. But do I have a list of them yet? No. Will we start getting a list together pretty quick? If this thing is a yes on October 2nd, you better believe it. And so we will be letting you guys know, I think, a whole lot more once we know where we stand on that day. But that's a really good question, and I appreciate you asking. Any other questions, any other comments that you guys want to share before we close? Guys, I love y'all. Look, part of what I love about you is the honesty that you shared tonight, the questions you asked, and I just want you to hear from me. I've appreciated how you have walked through the last 9 months, because I know it hasn't been easy, and I know it's been like the weirdest thing I could have brought to you in 2022. But man, I've really appreciated you as a church in this process. I've been probably more proud of you than I could express as a pastor and just as a person and a brother. And I am excited not for what this church looks like when we gather on Sunday mornings, nearly as much as I'm excited because I see God doing something pretty big. And I'm excited because I don't think I even understand exactly what it is he's trying to do. And that excites me because there's not a lot of moments that I don't have a pretty easy time starting to paint a picture and draw it in. But this is one of those moments where I just feel like God is up to something that I didn't anticipate, that I haven't been able to control, and that I have no idea what lays ahead. And I'm pretty excited by what that could mean. I'm excited about that for us. I'm excited about that for our city and what that could mean for our city in the midst of it. And so I just want to share that with you guys. I appreciate that. Look, I'm going to go back to something that Jakarian said earlier and throw this out. If you need to talk more this week, like, let me know. If you want to talk to me, if you want to talk to Grant, if you want to talk to one of the members of the merger team, if you need to talk this week, talk. If you just need to pray this week and say, hey, I need to pray with one of y'all, like, let us know, and we'll be glad to do that. But I just want you to know I love you. Can I close us, Samantha?
What are the dates that the sanctuary will be open for prayer?
So Monday night, Tuesday night, Thursday night, and Friday night. The sanctuary will be open from 6 to 8 p.m. Going through that. So thanks for asking that. All right, let me close us in prayer, and then we will be done. Father, I just come to you, and Lord, I thank you just for this time together. I thank you for the questions that were asked, the testimonies that were shared, Lord, the suggestions that were made. But God, more than any of that, I'm just thankful for your church. Because, Lord, we really do need each other. And God, we really aren't whole without each other. And Lord, I'm so grateful for this body that you have drawn together here at SEC. I'm so grateful to be a part of it. I'm so grateful to be able to walk with them and pastor them. And Lord, my prayer is that you would be with us in the same way over this next week. That God, you would give us a clarity, that you would give us a peace and a confidence. And Lord, that as we come together next Sunday, as we cast votes maybe that are online because we're traveling, that Lord, you would just make it abundantly clear what it is that you desire for our church. And Lord, if this is a path that you are calling us down, that God, not only would you make it abundantly clear, but Lord, that as we begin to walk down that path, that you would be with us in power, that you would be with us in grace and in humility, and Lord, that you would build in Bridgeway a church that's after your heart, like this church has been after your heart, and like Calvary has been after your heart. And Lord, that the story that you write in us over the next 19 years would be as powerful as the story that you've written in our church over the past 19 years. And so, Lord, that's our prayer. Thank you again for everybody that was here or that may have been watching. Thank you for our church. Thank you just for Jesus. And Lord, that he's the only reason that we're even having this conversation, that we're even here. And so, Lord, never let us forget that. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen. Church family, thank you all so much for being here tonight. Thank you guys for joining us if you were with us online.